All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick's Strength and Power. So in this video, I wanted to talk about the difference between a quote-unquote short bicep and long bicep head. So you're going to see two different kinds of biceps in bodybuilding primarily. So the first kind, I think one of the best examples of the long muscle belly is going to be looking at Larry Scott. So Larry Scott was one of the most famous bodybuilders in terms of having that long muscle belly and having really good arms at the same time. So basically, when someone refers to a bicep as being a long bicep or a long bicep head, what they're referring to is a long muscle belly with a short tendon where the muscle pretty much extends all the way to the forearm when flexed from the front. So that's what a long bicep looks like, from the forearm to the shoulder. So when people refer to a short bicep or a short bicep head, what they're referring to there is a short muscle belly with a long tendon. So when you flex the bicep from the front, the bicep looks kind of similar to a heart, and it has a much better peak or a much more pronounced peak than a long bicep. And typically in that front double bicep, you can see the tendon between the bicep muscle and the forearm in the front double bicep, whereas with the long muscle belly, you can't see that tendon. Now, I think if we look back at past Mr. Olympia winners and try to find a Mr. Olympia that best exemplified that short bicep head, I think Ronnie Coleman or Arnold Schwarzenegger would be two very good examples of the short bicep head. Now, another fascinating thing about the long versus short biceps is that typically throughout bodybuilding history, there have been a lot of famous rivalries between a Mr. Olympia and a Mr. Olympia runner-up, where each guy had a different inserted bicep. So if we go back to the early Mr. Olympias and you take Sergio Oliva, for example, another guy with a long bicep head, you can see the bicep goes all the way to the forearm, very long and thick bicep. He had a rivalry with Arnold Schwarzenegger, very famous for having the very peaked, very short bicep heads. Then in the Pumping Iron documentary, Arnold versus Lou Ferrigno. Lou Ferrigno, a guy, again, who has famously long bicep heads, Arnold having famously short bicep heads. Fast forward to more modern times. I would say Phil Heath is an example of a guy that has a long bicep head, and Kai Green has very, very peaked and very, very short bicep heads, and they're one of the greatest bodybuilding rivalries of all time. So I think the fascinating difference between these two different types of bicep heads typically ends in these two guys both being, very impressive bodybuilders, and really coming down to the separation between first and second at the Olympia. So I also wanted to throw in this video a couple of extreme examples of a short bicep head. So a very extremely peaked bicep to the point where the shape of the bicep is almost distorted looking. So this example here is going to be Leonard St. Cyr. So this guy is a UK bodybuilder, and this guy has one of the craziest bicep peaks I've ever seen. And a lot of people say it's so peaked that it doesn't even look aesthetic or appealing to them. It almost looks weird. It doesn't even look normal. It is a very, very extreme case of a short bicep head and a very peaked bicep. And then, of course, a lot of people refer to the shape of a short bicep head as a heart-shaped bicep. I think the best example of that would be Albert Beckles. Albert Beckles, his biceps really dead-on resembled a heart, like turned on its side. So I think he's a perfect example of that analogy of a short head bicep being heart-shaped. And one of the questions that I get a lot that's kind of a misconception about short versus long muscle bellies is how do I train my muscle belly to be short or long? And the answer to that question is you can't. It's just simply genetics. You're born with one muscle belly or the other, and you got to do your best to train it. You don't really have an option of being short or long. You're just born that way. And I would say a perfect example of this would be Sergio Oliva and his son, Sergio Oliva Jr. They have very, very similar arms. They both have long muscle belly biceps. And that's a perfect example of those muscle belly genetics being passed on from one generation to another genetically. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, maybe found it interesting. Please give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.